great horned owls in the southwest here in Saskatchewan, and I used community science and satellite transmitters. Okay, so just a quick brief of what I'm sure everyone has seen great horned owls, knows what they are. One interesting fact about them, though, is that they are the most widespread owl in North and South America. So they occur almost everywhere, from the northern tree line to the tip of Chile, kind of just excluding the Amazon rainforest and some of the high elevation deserts. So they're a very adaptable, widespread bird. They use a hunting style where they like to sit on an elevated perch where they visually spot their prey and then swoop in silently and grab them. They are a pretty large raptor. Normally I have an example, but a female is about this large and males are just a little bit smaller. And because of their large size and their wide range, they eat an abundance of prey. They have one of the largest prey base of any of our raptors, next to like red-tailed hawks, and anything under a certain size is not safe from a great horned owl. They are non-migratory, so even in the northern part of their range, they are here all year round. They do not build their own nests. They don't even maintain the nest they use. They just steal it from other birds. And they're such early nesters, they do it before the other birds even arrive back from migration. So even here in Saskatchewan, they will be nesting as early as late February. So during my field work, it was not uncommon to see females on the nest with snow accumulated on their backs. So very hardy birds. They are a native species to Saskatchewan, but here down south in the prairies, they would have been in really low populations. So they would have been restricted to riparian zones and natural tree groves, and anywhere there would be some trees, but not in the open grasslands and not very often. So modern changes that occurred that really benefited great horned owls in this area was, of course, fire suppression. There's more woody vegetation in the riparian areas, as well as spreading out of the riparian areas in a lot of areas. There's also the planting of trees and shrubs. They really like shelter belts. And then urbanization. They really enjoy old abandoned buildings. So old barns, old buildings, probably owls are either in there or visiting there every night. Okay, so why care that there's a lot of great horned owls? So since the 1970s, their population has actually really increased in this region, in the mixed grass prairies specifically, and now they are coming into conflict with a lot of species conservation efforts for our native grassland species. So I was actively finding great horned owls with burrowing owls in their nest. They were taking adults as they were foraging for their young. I also found sharp-tailed grouse. So that is a pretty large bird. They were taking out grouse and actively bringing them back to the nest. So these are large birds capable of taking out other large birds. You can see the one image there. That is 9 waterfowl I took out of a single nest. That would have been the effort of just the parents over 2 nights because they had not started to smell yet. Those are fresh kills. There were so many ducks piled in that nest. I thought there was 1 nestling. There was actually 3 nestlings. The other ones just had ducks on top of them. And also on the top there, just to add, they do eat gophers, so they're also good to have around sometimes. Okay, so the first part of my project, I wanted to see where are they actually nesting in the prairies. So to do that, I used community science data sets, so things like eBird and the Saskatchewan Breeding Bird Atlas, but I also used a survey that I put out that I showed on social media, as well as aid from the Royal Saskatchewan Museum to get that out there to people. And I had 850 people from the prairies report in saying that they had owls either in their yards or where they knew locations of. So that was fantastic turnout. So grateful to have so many people come in and give information for my project. So here's the nests. These are just the Saskatchewan ones in the mixed and mixed moist prairies. I also highlighted the South of Divide. A lot of those are actually ones I found during my field work. But you can see quite a few people gave me nests, and these are only the confirmed nests, the ones I could actively find on Google Earth looking. So I had far more reports. I had well over 4,000 reports. So to look at the habitat around these nests, I put 3 buffers around so I could see the differences to determine what they were selecting for at what range, because great horned owls can have quite large territories. So I looked at the 3 kilometer square, 9 kilometer square, and 17 kilometer square around each confirmed nest. And I looked at numerous variables, and I did some fancy math stuff that's kind of boring, but essentially what I did was look at what variables are actually important, at what scale, and use that to do predictions on how likely an owl was likely to nest there based on the proportion of that variable, and then that variable in relation to other variables. So you don't have to memorize all these, but like trees, green arrow, obviously they love trees. More trees, the better. And in Saskatchewan, you rarely get too many trees, because sometimes owls don't like too many trees, but here, as many as they can get. Shrubs, they don't really like shrubland. It obscures their ability to actually catch their prey. Buildings, they like some buildings, and then when you get to a threshold of too many buildings, they suddenly don't like it anymore. But essentially all that back work was to be able to make some fancy maps. So this is a heat map of where great horned owls are most likely to nest here in the south of the divide. So orange being high, medium, and low blue. And then at the bottom here, I kind of did the human footprint. And it's not a one-for-one, but you can really see that they kind of like where people are and where people put buildings and where people plant trees. And where it gets really interesting is I overlaid where the owls are most likely to be with where remaining grasslands here in the south of the divide are. And so everything in red are areas where native grassland species are most at risk of being eaten by great horned owls. And as I had mentioned, they very much were catching burrowing owls in the areas that I actually have indicated on this map. So the second part of my project was to take a closer look at the great horned owl's home ranges and where they were actively choosing to hunt. So the perches that they were looking for in order to have that elevated position to actually catch their prey. So here's all the nests that I had found during my fieldwork. So 2022 to 2023, I was running all over the south of the divide and surrounding area looking for every owl I could find. So here's just kind of an overview of where they are, as you notice, including some here around East End. And I found 197 pairs of great horned owls, and of those I confirmed that 157 of them were nesting. Quite a few didn't nest last year due to the deep snow in late winter, early spring. They just decided to hold territory but not nest because it impedes their ability to actually catch prey. So out of those 157 pairs, I selected 16, actually 19, but transmitters sometimes don't like to work. So 16 worked, where I captured them and put satellite transmitters on them. So here's some images. So at the top left is me putting actually a baby hat over their head of a great horned owl. It keeps them calm while I'm putting the transmitter on. And that owl is actually the East End owl. So this owl is our local boy. Below that is my net setup. So I used mist nets to catch the owls. And it's hard to see, but there's actually 2 nets in that picture. They're set in a V formation with a taxidermy great horned owl in the center. And I played territorial hooting calls to bring in more, hoping for the male to come in. He doesn't see the net, he goes in, and now he has some shiny new equipment. On the top right is me actively trying to track down one of my owls, because in the middle top you'll see there's the brown unit, that's the satellite transmitter. But to find the bird in real time, I glued the little gray unit with the tail, that's the VHF transmitter. And then at the bottom is also our East End boy, me and my 2 advisors, Dr. Chris Summers and Ryan Fisher. And so here's a map of the owls I was actively tracking. So most of them are in South Divide, and then I have 2 outside of the South Divide, just to kind of cover the basis on getting broad habitat types. So I was looking at owls in predominantly cropland, grassland, and then kind of more of a mixed habitat, which our East End boy is a mixed habitat. what the transmitter data gives us. So the white are locations taken while the bird was moving, but the red are where he was perched, so presumably hunting. And you can see by the inset there that he likes to hang out in this abandoned old ranch yard. Nobody lives there anymore, and the owl just took over all the trees and buildings and having a great time there. But you can see that his use area is quite spread out. He has several places he likes to visit frequently, and then oddly enough, there's areas where he seems to completely avoid. So I wanted to go in and get a better idea of why does he choose this spot over this spot, why does he only go here frequently, and why does he go here never. And just so, because we're in East End, I wanted to show you guys the East End bird. So this is the male. We caught him actually right in town, right in the park. And he goes all through town. He goes southwest of town. And interestingly enough, he doesn't use the park nearly as much as I thought he would. So if you live here, he might visit your house. And here's an example of a grassland owl. So this owl's territory, it's a lot more spread out. He's a lot more confined to the river and the slopes of the river. And he makes one giant trip multiple times when he was being tracked. He went over 9 kilometers to a dugout where he was hunting on the steep slope of the dugout. And he was willing to make that trip multiple times a night, really frequently. So that is a huge expenditure of energy for a bird, especially seeing as you're considering the fact that he's probably bringing prey back to the nest. So this bird is going that far and carrying food. And so here's a cropland owl and a grassland owl compared. And these are not the largest, and that is not the smallest cropland either. So the black squares are areas that kind of went to a couple times, but not too frequently. And then red is where they spent a lot of their time, and yellow is kind of intermediate. They went there fairly often, but not all the time. And so you can see the cropland owl is a lot more concentrated. He's got his core areas. He kind of does some exploring, but for the most part, he's sitting outside someone's barn eating deer mouse and being fat and happy. Whereas the grassland owl is having to travel a lot further distances to get the same amount of food to feed their offspring. So these grassland habitats, even though they are a native species, they're not built to be in open grasslands, so they're having to work a lot harder to get them. And this is just kind of a general trend. The more proportion of grassland in an owl's territory, the more likely the territory is going to be larger. So grassland owls, on average, are going to have larger territories than cropland or mixed habitat owls. And grassland owls, on average, at least the ones I had transmitted on, had 12.35 kilometer square territories. And some of them were a bit larger than that as well. As you can see from the one on the top, had 36 point something square kilometers. And the croplands only had on average 6.65, and I have one male who was really fat, happy, and lazy and only had about a 3 kilometer square, and he hardly ever left his 3 favorite barns. So here's a little bit closer look. In order to actually look at the perches they were selecting, I put all the owls' territories, I essentially put a digital grid over them, determined based on proportion of use. What each grid was it a high, low, or no use site? And I randomly selected those and went and did measurements of the perches to get an idea. So here's a closer look at just kind of a ranch yard where the owl spends some of his really high use areas. You can see he really likes shelter belts, and he really likes perching on people's homes and barns. And so here's an example of some of the grassland owls. So the top one is a natural tree grove that the owl is actively traveling 4 kilometers one way, back and forth, multiple times a night in some cases, in order to access this area, because it's the only treed area within distance of their nest, and it was worth them traveling back and forth to. And then at the bottom is an inactive old homestead, and then an active, like someone lives in the other one, and the owl was also traveling back and forth in order to get enough food to feed their young. Okay, so some more ones that ended up being important to the owls were how tall the perch was, how close or how far the distance from the nest to the perch, how tall and dense the vegetation was, how much bare ground, but then also how was that bare ground arranged on the ground? Was it like clumps of bare ground or was it interspersed? And I was able to do predictive modeling to be like, okay, if this variable was at this, how likely was a great horned owl to use it a lot, a little, or not? So great horned owls really like perches about 5 to 10 meters, go over trees 5 to 10 meters, probably an owl sitting in it. They love buildings, especially grassland owls. If there's a building in range of a great horned owl, it will sit on it at some point that night. Of course, obviously trees, they really like trees, particularly trees between that 5 to 10 meters. And they do use fence posts, but way less than you would expect given the proportion of fence posts and road signs there are. So they're definitely not entering these areas because of fences. They're not attracted to fences, they just happen to use them because they're available. They really use areas within 300 meters of their nest, but those grassland owls are more than willing to go up almost 3 kilometers to access really high use areas. And then when you consider lower use areas, again, they're willing to go up to those 9 kilometers away. They really like actually bare ground, very mixed bare ground, because it allows them to actually see their prey and then catch their prey, where denser, taller vegetation obscures prey, but they still want to be near tall, dense vegetation because that's where the prey actually is hiding. So that's where the rodents actually are. So they really like places like roadside ditches where the tall vegetation meets the gravel road, or the edges of the field where there's a telephone pole on the edge of the field and the 2-track that you use to go towards wherever. They love those spots. Okay, so why look at this? Why care? Okay, so it's really about those grassland owls. I more or less looked at the other owls just to have a comparison to look at what these grassland owls are doing because they are impacting conservation efforts for species like burrowing owl, our grouses, even swift foxes. Pretty much, I'd say about 90% of species listed in the grasslands as endangered. There's only probably 2 that the great horned owl won't at least try to eat, and the 2 are bison and badgers. So anything else, I would not trust an owl with. Okay, so yeah, so what can be done? So this is mainly for those main critical conservation concern areas. So around burrowing owl colonies or around lekking sites. So removing abandoned infrastructure like buildings and barns, they absolutely use them. They will use them. If they're available, they will. If you can't remove it, block entrances and put perch deterrents on them. Otherwise, they will absolutely use it. If you can, remove undesired trees or large shrubs that are over 5 meters tall from these sensitive areas will prevent the owls from actively pursuing. It should be noted that we're not trying to completely exclude owls, but just try to deter them from being like, this isn't the best spot, maybe I'll move on, kind of thing. So the area of importance, of course, is that first 400 meters around like a lek site or something. That is prime, easy location for an owl to grab them, but up to a kilometer radius around those areas are also critical for perch removal. And then beyond that, it's recommended like 1 to 2 kilometers of selective thinning of perches if you can. So kind of going in, and if there's like an unused shelter belt that's been abandoned for a decade, removing it, or removing at least part of the trees. Benefits are you're discouraging the owls from nesting in these areas, and you're also discouraging non-territorial birds from just coming in and hunting directly around these critical sites. By removing these perches, you're actually improving habitat for a bunch of other grassland native species. And most notably, you're not really impacting ferruginous hawks either, or other perching raptors native to the prairies, because they have evolved with low perch low perches available to them. And gray horned owls, again, you're not trying to remove everything, you're just trying to discourage them, and they need far more perches than our native hawks. And this is a non-lethal control method. You're not harming the owls. They're non-migratory, but they do disperse naturally, so they'll just move on. If an area is not suitable for them, they'll just move on. And by managing habitat instead of just resorting to lethal patrol, you're discouraging future owls from moving in as well. It's a far more long-term solution. But I love owls. I'm not here to say get rid of all the gray horned owls. So if you actually like gray horned owls, you're not in range of lecking sites or burrowing owl colonies, and you would actually like owls, there's ways to take my research and flip it on its head and actually encourage gray horned owls. So if you do live in, let's say, outside East End, or you live closer to a more urban area and you want some owls, some benefits, they are excellent at rodent control. They do actually in the summer eat gophers as well. They're all year round, so you get that benefit all year round. They're a remarkably human tolerant species, so even if they're nesting in your yard, you can still use your yard. I think they're very cool, so I want them in my yard. And then they also do phenomenally well on nesting platforms. So if you wanted to place a nesting platform in your yard, I do have some measurements and stuff that they seem to really enjoy. And that's a picture of a female that got a sudden brain blast on her, and she doesn't know what hit her. She's all wet.